Hello you guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about the murder of Cassie Jo Stoddart. So let's dive in and get started. On Friday, September 22nd in 2006, 16-year-old Cassie Jo Stoddart agreed to babysit or house sit her aunt and uncle's house. They were going to be away for the weekend on vacation. She agreed to accept a little money to watch the house and the animals while they were away. Her mother dropped her off at the house roughly about 5:30 after school that day. Shortly after Cassie Jo's arrival at the house, her boyfriend Matt Beckham arrived to spend some time with her. The two hung out, watched some movies, and after a while, their two friends, Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk, arrived at the house to also enjoy movies. However, Draper and Adamczyk were under the impression that it was going to be more of a house party, more than just a small get-together hangouts. So the two only stayed about half an hour before they got bored, and they said that they would rather watch a movie at the movie theater. So they both agreed to leave. They said their goodbyes to Matt and Cassie and left the house with the two of them alone. Cassie's boyfriend Matt claims that after Draper and Adamczyk left, the two continued to watch a movie. And then during the time that they were watching the movie, the power went out and all the lights went out for a few moments, and then it came back on. And while they were still waiting and watching the movie, one of the family dogs kept staring and barking at the basement door. And this really scared and creeped out Cassie Jo so much that she really wanted Matt to stay the night. So when Matt's mom arrived about 10:30 to pick up Matt, he had asked his mom if he could stay the night, which of course she declined because two teenagers staying the night in an abandoned house by their own is probably not the best idea. So she declined. But she did offer that Cassie Jo could come over and spend the night at their house if she really felt that uncomfortable. Cassie declined because she felt that she had a responsibility to stay there to watch the house and the animals like she had agreed to do. So she kind of sucked it up, said goodbye to Matt, and Matt and his mom left shortly after 10:30. 2 days later, on Sunday the 24th, Cassie's aunt and uncle and their family came home from their vacation. Their 13-year-old daughter, Cassie, was the first one to go into the house, and she discovered Cassie Jo's lifeless body in the living room floor. The body was covered in blood, and they immediately knew that she was not alive. The police arrived at the scene and discovered that Cassie Jo had been stabbed roughly 29 times, and about 9 of those stab wounds were considered fatal. So this seemed to be very overkill, and they quickly believed that it was somebody who knew Cassie personally, and this just wasn't a random killing or random break-in or robbery gone wrong. Cassie Jo was laid to rest on September 30th. About roughly 500 people attended the funeral, many of those admitting that they did not know Cassie Jo at all, but had heard her story on the news and felt really moved and empowered to attend to show their respects to the 16-year-old. Cassie was known for being a sweet and very kind person, the kind of person that would lend an ear if you had problems you needed to talk about, and she was also a straight A student. So of course the first person that they looked to was Matt Beckham, the boyfriend, because that was the last person to see Cassie alive that night. When they went to interview Matt Beckham, Cassie's boyfriend, he appeared to be very emotionless. Not like somebody who had just lost their girlfriend. He seemed very normal, very straight to the point. However, he still seemed very honest about his answers and his whereabouts of that night. He did inform the police that Draper and Adamczyk stopped by at the house, so that was 2 more suspects that were added onto the police's list. After knowing of their attendance at the house that night, the police went to investigate and interview Draper and Adamczyk. They interviewed them separately, but their stories matched pretty well, and they pretty much added up to the fact that they were there at the house, they admitted that they stopped by to watch movies, and once again they thought it was going to be more of a party. They got very bored, and then after about 30 minutes or so, they left and went to the movie theaters, and they also had receipts. So overall, this seemed like a dead end. Both of their stories checked out, seemed to collaborate one another, so they kind of stopped looking towards them. In the meantime, Matt was brought in for a polygraph test at the police station, which he passed with flying colors. So once again, it appeared that they had met another dead end, but they did have the lead of the alibi of Draper and Adamczyk. So the police went to the local movie theater where the boys claimed they attended and they had the receipt from. They wanted to investigate and confirm the alibi. However, when they got to the movie theater, they actually talked to a worker who was a former classmate of Draper and Adamczyk, and she knew them and claimed that they were not there that night because she would have known because she knew them personally, and claimed that they had never come into the theater booth for her to rip their ticket. I assume this is pretty similar, kind of like if you go to AMC or most theaters, you buy your ticket at the counter and then you go to another section to have them rip your ticket. I assume that is kind of what she was saying, that she was working in kind of that ticket ripping booth where they could have easily came in and bought a ticket for the movie, which they had, but she claims that she had never seen them actually come into the theater. After police found this out, that Draper and Adamczyk were most likely lying, they brought them back in for interrogation. And when questioned on the movie or the plot of the movie, if they could remember anything to establish that alibi that they actually went in, they could not say what the movie was about that they saw. They couldn't say any actors or actresses in the movie. They couldn't even tell you what the general idea or plot of the movie was. So the police knew right away that they were lying, and this kind of confirmed their suspicions. After being confronted and interrogated from the police, the boys eventually admitted that they were lying. However, they had nothing to do with Cassie's murder, and instead they were actually spending that night breaking into local cars and stealing items from unlocked cars. And that is why they lied. However, they did not have anything to hold the boys on, so they had to let them go, even though they still were very suspicious of their story. However, on September 27th, 5 days after Cassie Joe's death, Brian Draper and his parents come back into the station. Brian Draper is crying, very distraught. It is obvious that he has something that he wants to tell the police, but he's very hesitant to do so. They eventually get the truth out of Draper, and he admits that both Adamczyk and Draper returned to the house that evening to pull a prank on Cassie. He admitted that they had turned off the lights in order to scare Matt and Cassie, and after Matt had left, they came back in to scare Cassie once again as a prank. However, Draper claims that it was Adamczyk who took the prank too far and began stabbing Cassie during their prank. Draper admitted no responsibility to the murder, and it was said it was 100% Adamczyk. Of course, the next step was the police brought in Tory Adamczyk himself to further investigate, and Adamczyk said 100% yes, that is exactly what happened. They were planning a prank. They turned off the lights. They unlocked the basement door so they could re-enter back into the house later to once again continue their prank to scare Cassie. However, Tory claimed that it was 100% Brian Draper that took the prank too far and began stabbing Cassie, and he had nothing to do with the murder. It became a game of pointing the finger at each other. Each boy blamed the other 100%, and each tried to evade any responsibility of the murder. But the police knew a fact that the boys didn't know that the police knew. The police knew that there were at least 2 different types of knives used in Cassie's stabbing, which means most likely there was at least 2 assailants and 2 different people stabbing Cassie that caused her death. So they knew that they had the right to, mostly because both of them were saying things that only the person who murdered Cassie Joe would know, and very fine details. Although, once again, they were just pointing the blame at each other, and neither one was accepting the fact that they also took the prank too far. So eventually, Brian Draper agreed that he would show the police where they hid the mask, knives, and other things that happened during the murder that he helped Tory hide. So Brian Draper took them to Black Rock Canyon, where they had dug a shallow grave and buried all the items. But there was something that Brian didn't know. Brian didn't know that Tory Adamczyk, before covering up that hole, tossed in a videotape. When the police dug up that hole, they found the videotape among all these other items. So you may be wondering the most important question of all right now, what was on that videotape? So I will show you what is on the tape. This is what the police and investigators saw. So it became very obvious that this was not an accidental prank gone wrong. This is very premeditated. Draper and Adamczyk actually targeted and planned on killing Cassie Joe personally. They thought it would be a lot easier to target somebody close to them first. They were very, very obsessed with killers, serial killers, such as Ted Bundy. They were very obsessed with Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, the Columbine shooters. So they kind of were feeding into each other's kind of very evil, kind of minded, twisted ideas, rather than one of them at any point saying, hey, this is kind of crazy. They very much fed into each other's kind of ideas, and they very much went along with it. Both boys were equally involved in the planning, murder, and aftermath of Cassie Jo's murder. Eventually, with all this evidence stacked up against them, one of the boys finally decided to tell the truth. And we finally found out what really happened that night. Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk had fully planned on killing Cassie Jo that night. They knew ahead that she was going to be alone house sitting at this particular house. They knew the address, they knew exactly where it was, and was invited over by Matt. While at the house, Brian Draper went downstairs into the basement and unlocked the basement window or the door. He unlocked one of them in order to re-enter the house later with the full intent of murdering Cassie. Once back upstairs, the boys said that they were bored and they would rather leave and go watch a movie at the theater. They pretended to leave, but not long after, they re-entered the house downstairs. They turned off the power while Matt was still there, scaring both Matt and Cassie, and most likely what the dog was barking at and staring at the basement was the presence of Tori and Brian. It was said later that they honestly were waiting for Matt or Cassie to come down to the stairs at that point, and they were fully prepared to murder them both if they had to. But neither one of them came down, and it kind of just bummed them out. When they heard Matt leave the house about 10:30, they knew that it was their second chance to scare and startle Cassie and have her come downstairs into the basement. However, once again, Cassie did not fall for that. She stayed upstairs. So Brian and Tori put on masks and had knives ready in hand and went upstairs and confronted Cassie in the living room, stabbing her roughly 29 times. I could not imagine the fear Cassie had while house sitting alone and having just the power go out multiple times, and then having a dog act strange and feeling the presence. And I could not imagine that horror of actually confronting with somebody else in the house besides yourself when you're home alone and knowing that they are going to hurt you. I can absolutely not imagine the fear that she had to go through, which I think makes this crime so much more heinous in the fact that it was somebody that she knew. She had no peace at her ending. I believe even from when Matt was still there and when the lights and power and the weird happenings were going on, just to have that fear kind of settle into you and it only get worse, it's just horrible. Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk's trials were held separately. They happened about 2007 in the spring and summertime. Both boys were sentenced to life without the chance of parole. And both boys are currently serving their sentence at the Idaho State Correctional Institution. Both Draper and Adamczyk have since tried to appeal their sentences, but luckily it has been denied up to this point. However, it is not in the clear just yet. In 2016, the Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional for minors to receive life sentences without the possibility of parole. So this has allowed a lot of minors who have been sentenced to life, such as Brian and Tori themselves, to have a chance to be resentenced and have pretty much a retrial of their convictions, which I can only imagine for the family would be so painful and so hard to have to relive that, and to just know that these boys have the chance of getting out there and getting off early, when it's clear that these boys, with the planning, the premeditation, this was not something that was accidental. This is not something that happened to these good boys. This is something that they truly had some evil in their hearts to do this. And these are the kind of people who I believe personally do not need to be back out on the street. If they can murder a friend so violently without any remorse, it's only crazy to think about what they could do. So comment below, what do you guys think of this case? Do you guys think it is crazy as I do? and comment below if you have a case in mind that you would like me to cover or talk about in the future. And until then, thank you guys for stopping by.